The billionaire's daughter had only 3 days to live, but a poor girl poured holy water on her and… Can you imagine the desperation of a billionaire father discovering that all his money, all his power, all his connections mean absolutely nothing when his daughter's life is hanging by a thread? Fernando Silva had everything. Mansions, luxury cars, a bank account with more zeros than most people could ever count. But none of it mattered when the doctors gave him the cruelest sentence a father can hear. His daughter Clara had only 3 days to live. 3 days. And worse, he had already tried everything. He brought in the best specialists in the world, paid fortunes for experimental treatments, moved heaven and earth. Nothing worked. For the first time in his life, the man who controlled empires discovered that there is something money cannot buy: more time with the ones we love. And just when you think this story couldn't get any more intense, something completely unexpected happens. A poor little girl, wearing worn clothes and barefoot, invades the hospital room where Clara is dying. The guards can't explain how she got in. And before anyone can stop her, the child does something that leaves everyone frozen. She pours water on the face of the girl who is supposed to die within hours. Ordinary water? No. Water from an ancient source that, according to legend, has miraculous powers. The father is about to throw the intruder out when he notices something impossible. The heart monitors begin to change, the vital signs improve, and Clara, for the first time in weeks, moves. Coincidence? The doctors say yes. But then comes the shock that turns everything upside down. The poor girl claims she has known Clara for months, that they are best friends from a community daycare where the billionaire's daughter used to go in secret, climbing over the wall of the expensive school she attended. Clara's secret life is about to be revealed, and with it, truths that will destroy and rebuild an entire family. But wait, because there's more. Against all medical prognosis, against all scientific odds, Clara begins to heal. Not a slow, gradual improvement. A recovery that keeps experienced doctors awake at night searching for explanations. Specialists from around the world analyze the case and cannot understand what is happening. The disease that should have killed her in days simply begins to disappear. And at the center of all of this is that poor little girl, with her unshakable faith and a small golden bottle of miraculous water. But did the miracle really come from the water? Or is there something far more powerful happening there, something science cannot measure and money could never buy? The answer will make you question everything you thought you knew about what truly heals, what truly matters, and what truly has power in this world. This true story will show you how an unlikely friendship between a rich girl and a poor girl challenged medicine, broke social barriers, and proved that sometimes miracles come wrapped in the most unexpected forms. You will discover the truth behind that holy water, you will understand what really saved Clara, and in the end, you will realize that the greatest miracle was not what you imagined at all. Stay until the end, because the revelation will change your perspective on life, death, faith, and love. And if this story touches your heart the way it touched mine, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible stories like this that prove extraordinary things are still happening in this world. Let's begin at the beginning, when Fernando Silva received the news that shattered his world. Fernando Silva never imagined that one day he would be there, in that cold hospital corridor, with his hands trembling and his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was a man who had built an empire from nothing, who led meetings with company presidents, who signed multimillion-dollar contracts without hesitation. But nothing, absolutely nothing in his life had prepared him to hear the words that came from the doctor's mouth like a death sentence. "Mr. Silva, we did everything within our power. Your daughter Clara has only 3 days to live." 3 days. 72 hours. 4,320 minutes to see his little princess for the last time. Fernando felt his legs give way, and for the first time in decades, that powerful man felt the true meaning of the word helplessness. Clara was there, lying in that white hospital bed, so small, so fragile, connected to tubes and machines that seemed bigger than she was. Her brown eyes, which once shone with the joy of a 6-year-old child, were now dim, lifeless, as if they were already saying goodbye to this world. Fernando approached slowly, afraid that even his presence might hurt her even more. He held that little cold hand and felt a pain so deep in his chest that he thought his own heart might stop beating right then and there. How does a father survive the death of a child? How does someone breathe knowing that the reason for their existence is about to disappear? These questions pounded in Fernando's mind as tears he didn't even know he could still shed streamed down his exhausted face. He had always believed that money solved everything. Always. When Clara was born, he swore to himself that he would give her everything money could buy. The best school, the best clothes, the best toys. And when she fell ill, he moved heaven and earth to bring in the best doctors on the planet. Specialists from Switzerland, the United States, and Germany were all there, examining his daughter, making diagnoses, proposing experimental treatments. Fernando paid fortunes for medications that hadn't even been approved yet, for procedures that cost the price of a house. But nothing worked. Nothing. Clara's disease was rare, aggressive, cruel. And now, after months of fighting, after spending millions, after doing everything a father could do, he was there watching his daughter waste away day after day. Fernando's wife, Mariana, couldn't handle the pressure. She had suffered an emotional collapse 2 weeks earlier and was hospitalized in another wing of the hospital, sedated, unable to process the reality that was about to destroy her family. Fernando was alone. Completely alone in a battle he knew he had already lost. He looked at Clara and saw not only his daughter, but the entire meaning of his life slipping through his fingers like sand. That little girl who called him daddy in that sweet voice, who ran into his arms when he came home from work, who drew colorful little cards saying, "I love you" in crooked letters. All of that was about to become nothing but memories. And Fernando couldn't accept it. He couldn't come to terms with it. He couldn't understand how the universe could be so cruel. That night, after the doctors left the room with the looks of pity he hated so much, Fernando was alone with Clara. The monotonous sound of the machines was the only thing breaking the heavy silence of that room that smelled of medicine and disinfectant. He knelt beside the bed, something he hadn't done since childhood, when his mother used to make him pray before going to sleep. But now it wasn't out of obligation. It was pure desperation. God, if you exist, if you're out there somewhere listening to me, please don't take my daughter. Take me instead. Take my fortune, take everything I have, but don't take her. She's just a child. She doesn't deserve this. His voice came out choked, broken, unrecognizable even to himself. But silence was the only answer he received. Deep down, Fernando knew he was making empty bargains with a universe that seemed deaf to his screams. 3 days. That was the deadline he had. 72 hours to say goodbye to the person he loved most in this world. How does a father say goodbye to a daughter? What should he say? Thank you for existing? I'm sorry I couldn't save you? No words seemed enough. No sentence could express the size of the hole opening in his chest. Fernando looked up at the ceiling of the room, at those white, cold lights that brought no comfort, and felt as if he were falling into a bottomless abyss. Outside the room, life went on. Nurses walked through the corridors, other patients received visitors, the hospital ran with its relentless routine. But inside, in that small room on the 10th floor, Fernando Silva's world was coming to an end. He, who had always been the man with all the answers, who solved every problem, who never showed weakness, was now completely broken. His hands, which had signed so many important contracts, now trembled as they held his daughter's cold hand. His eyes, which had faced so many adversaries in business, could no longer bear to see the suffering stamped on Clara's pale little face. And his heart, which he had always thought was as strong as steel, was shattering into pieces so small that he didn't know if he would ever be able to put them back together again. Fernando rested his forehead against the edge of the bed and let the tears fall freely. He cried like he had never cried before. He cried for all the moments he would never live with his daughter. For the graduations he would never see, for the wedding where he would never walk her down the aisle, for the grandchildren he would never meet. He cried for the injustice of an innocent child having to suffer like this. He cried because, for the first time in his life, he had no control over anything. All his money, all his power, all his influence meant absolutely nothing in the face of death knocking at the door. And that realization was more painful than anything he had ever experienced. Fernando Silva, the billionaire who controlled everything and everyone, was completely helpless before the cruel fate that had chosen his only daughter. The first specialists arrived on a private jet from Zurich before the sun had even risen. Fernando had paid a fortune to bring them in urgently, and they entered that Brazilian hospital like movie stars, carrying Italian leather briefcases and diplomas from universities most people only knew by name. He greeted them with desperate hope in his eyes, believing that those men and women in white coats held in their hands the solution local doctors had been unable to find. But it took only a few hours of tests, chart reviews, and result analyses for that hope to begin collapsing like a house of cards. The diagnosis was the same. The sentence identical. Clara had an extremely rare, aggressive degenerative disease, and time was running out far too quickly for any intervention to make a difference. Fernando refused to accept it. He couldn't accept it. He called contacts in Boston, home to one of the world's most renowned pediatric oncology hospitals. He offered to pay any amount, made his private jet available to pick up the doctors, promised to donate an entire wing to the hospital if they could save his daughter. And they came. 3 specialists arrived in the middle of the night, exhausted from the trip but professional to the core. They examined Clara for hours, held video calls with colleagues in the United States, debated experimental protocols that had never even been tested on humans. Fernando stayed in the hallway pacing back and forth, hands in his pockets, suit wrinkled, beard unshaven. He looked like a caged lion, powerless, waiting for a verdict he already knew. When the doctors left the meeting room, their faces said everything. There was nothing they could do. Medicine had reached its limit. But Fernando Silva was not a man who gave up easily. If traditional medicine had no answers, he would chase the impossible. He contacted laboratories in China that were developing genetic therapies not yet approved. He paid bribes, broke protocols, did whatever was necessary to gain access to treatments that existed only in testing phases on laboratory mice. He brought in experimental drugs that cost more than a mansion, medications that traveled in refrigerated containers with security escorts. The hospital doctors hesitated, warned him about the risks, about the lack of human studies, about possible adverse reactions. But Fernando wasn't interested in safety protocols. He was interested in saving his daughter, and if there was a 1% chance, he would risk everything. Clara received the first experimental treatment on a rainy Tuesday. Fernando stood outside the ICU, watching through the glass as nurses infused that clear liquid into his daughter's veins. He prayed, he begged, he made silent promises to any higher power willing to listen. In the first few hours, nothing happened. But the next day, Clara had a seizure so violent that they had to sedate her completely. Heart monitors blared alarms, doctors rushed into the room, and Fernando saw his daughter convulsing on that bed as if possessed by something terrible. The experimental treatment not only failed, it made her condition worse. This time the doctors were clear and direct, without detours or kindness. "Mr. Silva, if you continue these experiments, you will kill your daughter before the time she still has." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. Fernando sat down in that plastic chair in the hallway and, for the first time, understood what it meant to be truly defeated. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had signed checks with astronomical figures, that had shaken hands with presidents and celebrities, that had built an empire from nothing. And now those hands were empty. Completely empty. It didn't matter how many zeros he put on a check, how many specialists he brought from how many different countries, how many experimental treatments he tried. The cold, hard truth was that his money was worthless in the face of death. For the first time in his life, Fernando Silva discovered that there were things beyond the reach of his credit card. And that discovery was more painful than any financial loss he had ever experienced in business. He remembered all the times he had solved problems with money. When he was sued, he hired the best lawyers and won the case. When a competitor tried to destroy his company, he bought the competitor's company. When his mother got sick, he paid for the best treatment and she fully recovered. Money had always been the solution. Always. But now, for the first time, money was completely useless. Fernando could buy mansions, yachts, luxury cars, trips anywhere in the world. But he couldn't buy one more day of life for his daughter. He couldn't buy a cure. He couldn't buy a miracle. And that helplessness ate away at him from the inside like acid, burning every piece of his soul. He felt like the richest and, at the same time, the poorest man in the world. That night, after another day of tests that showed no improvement, Fernando was alone in the room with Clara. She was sleeping, or perhaps just unconscious from the amount of medication flowing through her veins. He held her hand and whispered words he never thought he would say. "I'm sorry, my princess. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry because everything I built in life is useless now. I always thought money was power, but I was wrong. I have no power at all. I'm just a desperate father watching his daughter leave, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing I can do." His voice broke with every word, and tears fell uncontrollably onto the white bed sheet. Fernando Silva was learning in the worst possible way that there are things in life that have no price because they simply are not for sale. The hospital corridors witnessed the transformation of a man. Fernando Silva, the powerful businessman, the respected and feared billionaire, was now just a broken, defeated, hollow man. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes red and swollen from so much crying. Hospital staff who once treated him with reverence now looked at him with pity. And he hated that. He hated seeing in their eyes that compassion that said, "Poor man, not all the money in the world can save his daughter." But the truth hurt more than wounded pride. The truth was that they were right. Fernando had tried to buy hope, but discovered that hope is not for sale. And now, with only days left in the cruel deadline the doctors had given him, he had to accept the unacceptable. He had to prepare for something no father should ever have to prepare for. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Fernando was sitting beside Clara's bed, lost in his dark thoughts, when he heard a noise at the door. It wasn't the professional sound of nurses coming in with their medication trays, nor the hurried steps of doctors making their rounds. It was different. It was the sound of small, light, almost silent footsteps. He lifted his tired eyes and saw something he never expected to see in that private room, guarded by security and restricted only to family and medical staff. A little girl. A young child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing simple, worn clothes, a cotton dress that had seen better days, and an old pair of sandals on her feet. She held something in her hands with such care that it looked as if she were carrying the greatest treasure in the world. It was a small golden bottle about the size of an old perfume vial. Fernando blinked several times, thinking he was hallucinating from exhaustion and stress. How had that child gotten in there? Where were the guards he had hired specifically to make sure Clara wouldn't be disturbed? He stood up from the chair, ready to call someone, ready to remove that girl before she brought in some infection or caused any trouble. But something in her gaze made him stop. It wasn't the look of a lost or frightened child. It was the look of someone with a purpose, a mission. Her brown eyes shone with a determination Fernando hadn't seen in weeks in that hospital full of resignation and defeat. The girl said nothing, only looked at Clara in the bed and then at Fernando, as if silently asking permission to do something she had planned for a long time. Before Fernando could react, before he could shout for help or block her path, the girl approached the bed with determined steps. She opened the golden bottle carefully as if opening a portal to another world, and then did something completely unthinkable, something so unexpected that Fernando froze for a few precious seconds. The girl poured water onto Clara's face. It wasn't a violent or aggressive gesture. It was gentle, almost ceremonial, as if that water were something sacred that needed to be delivered with respect. The droplets fell on Clara's pale forehead, ran down her colorless cheeks, dampened her dry lips. And in that moment, something inside Fernando exploded. A mix of anger, desperation, and confusion swept over him like a massive wave. "What are you doing?" Fernando's voice came out louder than he intended, echoing off the walls of the room. He lunged toward the girl, his hands trembling, ready to pull her away, ready to protect his daughter from whatever that intruder might have brought. But the girl didn't flinch. She didn't run, didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply looked at him with those calm eyes and said in a soft but firm voice, "I came to help Clara. She's my best friend." Those words struck Fernando like lightning. Best friend? What did she mean, best friend? Clara didn't have poor friends, didn't interact with children from the slums. She studied at an extremely expensive private school, lived in a luxury-gated community. Her world was completely different from the world of that girl in worn clothes. Fernando was about to shout again, about to call the guards and have the girl removed immediately, when something happened that made him freeze in place. Clara moved. It was a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but Fernando saw it. His daughter's fingers contracted slightly as if responding to some stimulus. He looked at the heart monitor and saw that the beats, which had been weak and irregular for days, seemed just a little more stable. Was it a coincidence? Was his desperate imagination creating hope where there was none? He didn't know, but something inside him, some deep paternal instinct, told him to wait, not to expel the girl yet, to see what would happen in the next few seconds. The girl, whose name Fernando still didn't know, put the golden bottle back into her small pocket and stepped closer to the bed. She extended her small hand and gently touched Clara's arm, as if waking a friend who had slept too long. "Clara, it's me, Anna. I came to see you. You promised we'd play again, remember? You promised you'd teach me that song you like so much." The girl's voice was sweet, filled with an innocence that felt completely out of place in that hospital room full of noisy machines and the smell of medicine. Fernando stood there, frozen, watching that surreal scene, trying to process what was happening. Who was this girl? How did she know Clara? And more importantly, what was that water she had poured on his daughter's face? At that moment, a nurse rushed into the room, followed by 2 guards who looked embarrassed and confused. "Mr. Silva, we're sorry. We don't know how she got through. She must have taken advantage of when the cleaning staff came in and—" But Fernando raised his hand, cutting off the clumsy explanation. His eyes were fixed on Clara, who was now moving her head slightly from side to side, as if trying to wake from a deep sleep. That wasn't normal. She had been completely unresponsive for more than 24 hours, not reacting to any external stimulus. And now, seconds after that girl poured water on her and spoke to her, there was movement. There was response. There was, could it be, hope? Fernando felt his heart race, a strange and almost forgotten sensation rising in his chest. Let her stay. The words left Fernando's mouth before his rational mind could fully process them. The guards exchanged confused looks, the nurse opened her mouth to protest, but Fernando was firm. I said let her stay. Everyone out and leave me alone with Ana. He had spoken the girl's name almost like a question, and she confirmed it with a nod and a small smile. The staff left reluctantly, murmuring among themselves, probably thinking the billionaire had finally lost his mind completely under the stress. But Fernando didn't care. He had seen too many things in recent months that science couldn't explain. And if that poor girl with her golden bottle and her sweet words could do something that all the world's specialists couldn't, then he was willing to give her a chance. When silence finally settled over the room and they were alone, Fernando turned to the girl who had invaded his world so unexpectedly. He knelt down to her level, his red, exhausted eyes meeting those small eyes full of life and determination. Ana, is that your name? She nodded, her little hands still gripping the hem of the simple dress she was wearing. How do you know my daughter? Where did you come from? And what was that water you poured on her? The questions spilled out one after another, urgent, desperate, loaded with a hope Fernando didn't even know still existed inside him. Ana looked at Clara, then back at Fernando, and with the brutal honesty only children possess, began to tell a story that would make the ground collapse beneath the feet of that billionaire father. I know Clara from the community daycare in the São Judas neighborhood. We play there every day after school. Anna's words echoed through the room like exploding bombs. Fernando felt the air leave his lungs. Community daycare? São Judas neighborhood? That was one of the poorest areas in the city, a place he would never have imagined his daughter setting foot in. That's impossible, he murmured, more to himself than to Ana. Clara studies at a private school on the other side of the city. She's picked up by a private driver every day. How would she go to a community daycare? But Ana shook her head with conviction, her eyes showing no sign of a lie. Clara went secretly. She climbed over the school wall during recess and came to play with us. She said that at her school no one wanted to be her friend for real, that everyone only cared about her father's money. Fernando felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Every word that came from that girl's mouth was a painful revelation about a part of his daughter's life he had no idea existed. Clara ran away from school? Clara climbed walls? Clara preferred playing at a poor daycare rather than with her classmates? How had he known nothing about this? Where had his attention been when his daughter was clearly so unhappy and lonely that she risked everything just to find real friends? The questions hammered in his mind as Ana continued speaking, each word digging deeper into his chest. Clara is my best friend in the whole world. She taught me to read better, gave me books she didn't use anymore, and I taught her how to make string bracelets and jump rope properly. We promised we would be friends forever. The girl slipped her hand into her pocket and pulled out something that instantly filled Fernando's eyes with tears. It was a colorful little bracelet, made of braided string in vibrant red, yellow, and blue. A friendship bracelet, the kind children make in exchange as a symbol of a true bond. Clara made this one for me and I made one just like it for her. We wore them all the time. Fernando remembered immediately. He remembered seeing that bracelet on Clara's wrist months earlier before she got sick. He had asked about it and she said it was a trend at school. He hadn't given it importance. He hadn't asked more questions. He hadn't investigated. He was always too busy, always closing another deal, always in another important meeting. And while he was building his empire, his daughter was building a secret life where she could be just a normal child with real friends. When Clara stopped showing up at the daycare, I got worried, Anna continued, her voice growing lower, sadder. I asked everyone, I went to her school, but the guards wouldn't let me in. Then I went to Dona Maria's church, the lady who takes care of us at the daycare, and I told her that my best friend had disappeared. She's the one who found out that Clara was sick and hospitalized here. Fernando swallowed hard. A stranger, a woman from a community daycare, had cared more about finding out what had happened to his daughter than he himself had cared to know about her social life. Guilt weighed on his shoulders like tons of concrete. What kind of father had he been? What kind of father leaves his daughter so lonely that she has to run away from school to find real affection? Ana wiped away a tear that rolled down her face and continued her story with the determination of someone on a mission. Dona Maria took me to the old well behind the hospital. She said that place was special, that many people had been healed by drinking that water, that there was an old story about miracles that happened there. She filled this little bottle for me and said that if I truly believed, if I had real faith, the water could help Clara. Fernando looked at the golden bottle Ana pulled from her pocket once again. It was a simple, cheap object, probably bought at some religious goods shop for just a few dollars. But to that girl it was a treasure. It was hope in liquid form. It was love translated into action. Fernando felt something breaking inside him. It wasn't just the discovery that his daughter had an entire life he knew nothing about. It wasn't just the guilt of having been an absent, inattentive father. It was something deeper, more painful. It was the realization that a poor girl, in a worn dress and carrying a bottle bought with coins, had more faith, more love, and more courage than he did with all his millions. Anna had taken risks, had entered a private hospital full of security guards, had bypassed security, all to bring that water to her friend. While Fernando hired the best doctors and paid for expensive treatments, that simple child was doing something he had never thought to do, bringing pure love, true faith, and genuine friendship. And perhaps, just perhaps, those things were more powerful than any medicine money could buy. "You took a big risk coming here," Fernando finally said, his voice choked with emotion. Anna shrugged with the simplicity of someone who had only done what was obvious. "Clara would do the same for me. True friends do everything for each other." Those simple words echoed in Fernando's heart like a church bell ringing in the early morning hours. True friends. When was the last time he had a true friend? When was the last time someone did something for him without expecting anything in return, without interest in his money or his connections? He couldn't remember. And there was his 6-year-old daughter, teaching him lessons about friendship, loyalty, and what truly matters in life. And the teacher was a poor girl who barely had decent shoes on her feet, but who had a heart bigger than all the expensive doctors' offices he had visited. Fernando needed to understand that story about the water and the well better. He asked Anna to sit in the chair beside Clara's bed and began asking questions, this time more calmly, with more attention, giving that child the respect and seriousness she deserved. "Tell me about this well, Anna. Tell me everything you know about that water." The girl settled into the chair, her little feet swinging in the air without reaching the floor, and began to narrate with that childlike ability to mix facts and magic as if they were the same thing. "Dona Maria said the well is back behind the hospital where nobody goes anymore. She said that a long time ago, before they built this big building, that place was sacred, a water source that people in the region believed was miraculous. They say many sick people came from far away to drink that water and went back home healed." Fernando knew the history of the land where the hospital had been built very well. He himself had taken part in board meetings where it was briefly mentioned that the site had historical importance to the old local community. But he had never paid attention to those details, which seemed superstitious and irrelevant to a pragmatic businessman like him. Now, sitting there in that room listening to that girl speak with such fervor about a miraculous spring, he regretted not having paid more attention. Dona Maria said that even after they built the hospital, the water from the well keeps flowing underground, and that some people who have worked here for a long time still go there to get water when someone they love is sick. She said the water doesn't heal because it has medicine in it, but because it carries faith, hope, and the love of centuries of people who believed in it. Anna's words were simple, but they carried a weight Fernando never imagined a child's words could carry. He looked at Clara, still motionless in the bed, but now he noticed that her breathing seemed just a little less labored. Was it his imagination? Was desperation making him see things that weren't there? He wasn't sure, but there was something different in the air of that room. A subtle energy, almost imperceptible but present. As if Anna's mere presence and her unshakable faith had brought something that all the medical equipment and expensive medications had failed to bring. Life. A tiny spark of life that refused to go out completely. Fernando found himself wanting to believe in that story of miraculous water, even though all his rational education, all his training in logic and numbers, screamed that it was absurd. "Do you really believe this water can heal Clara?" Fernando asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability he rarely showed anyone, let alone a child he had just met. Anna looked at him with those deep eyes and answered without hesitating for even a second. "I believe it because I love Clara. And when you truly love someone, you believe in the impossible." Dona Maria said that faith moves mountains, and if it can move mountains, it can heal my friend too. The childlike logic was at once naive and profound, simple and complex. Fernando felt something stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope. Real hope, not the desperate, false hope he had tried to buy with money, but a genuine hope rooted in something far more powerful than science or medicine. At that exact moment, something extraordinary happened. Clara's eyes moved beneath her closed eyelids, as if she were dreaming or trying to wake up. Fernando jumped to his feet, his heart racing, and moved closer to the bed. "Clara? Clara, my love, can you hear me?" His voice came out trembling, filled with an emotion he couldn't control. Anna also stood up and gently touched Clara's hand, whispering softly, "Clara, it's me, Anna. I brought the special water Dona Maria talked about." You're going to be okay, I promise. And then, as if those words had the power to cross the veil separating Clara from the conscious world, her eyelids trembled and slowly, very slowly began to open. Just a few millimeters, but it was more movement than she had shown in days. Fernando couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked at the heart monitor and saw that the beats, which minutes earlier had been weak and irregular, were now showing a more stable, stronger pattern. It wasn't normal yet, it wasn't what it should be, but it was better. It was definitely better. He pressed the call button to summon the nurses, but he didn't take his eyes off Clara for a single second. Was this really happening? After weeks of constant decline, was his daughter finally responding? Fernando's rational mind tried to find logical explanations. Maybe it was just a temporary fluctuation. Maybe the medications were finally taking effect. Maybe it was coincidence. But deep down, in a part of him that still believed in things beyond what the eyes can see, he knew it had something to do with Anna, with the water, with that pure faith the girl had brought into the room. The nurses rushed in, alerted by Fernando's urgent call. They checked the monitors, examined Clara, and the expressions on their faces shifted from professional routine to genuine surprise. Her vital signs have improved, one of them said, almost disbelieving her own words. It's not a dramatic change, but it's definitely an improvement. I'll call the attending physician immediately. As she ran out of the room, the other nurse continued checking Clara, adjusting the equipment, writing down the new numbers in the chart. Fernando and Anna stood there side by side, a powerful billionaire and a poor little girl, united by the same hope, the same silent prayer, the same love for the child fighting for her life in that hospital bed. And for the first time in weeks, Fernando felt that maybe, just maybe, the ending of this story didn't have to be tragic. The doctor arrived minutes later, wearing the serious, professional expression Fernando knew so well. He examined Clara carefully, checked the monitors multiple times, and ordered new blood tests to be done immediately. Fernando followed him into the hallway, leaving Anna alone with Clara for a moment. "Doctor, what's happening? Is she getting better?" The question came out loaded with a hope he was afraid to nurture but could no longer suppress. The doctor adjusted his glasses and replied with the caution of someone who had seen many unpredictable cases. "Mr. Silva, it's too early to say anything for certain. It could be just a temporary fluctuation before a final decline. But yes, at this moment, your daughter is showing slightly better vital signs than she has over the past 48 hours. We'll monitor her closely and run new tests. I don't want to create false hope, but I also can't deny what the numbers are showing." The test results began to come in over the following hours, and each one brought a greater surprise than the last. The protein levels that indicated the progression of the disease had decreased slightly. The white blood cell count, which had been dangerously low, showed a small increase. Kidney function, which had been compromised, showed signs of slight improvement. They were subtle changes, almost imperceptible if viewed individually, but when put together they formed a picture that challenged everything the doctors had predicted. Fernando stood beside Dr. Mendez as he analyzed the results on the computer screen, his eyes scanning the numbers over and over as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "This doesn't make sense," the doctor murmured, more to himself than to Fernando. "Patients at this stage don't show spontaneous improvement. They just don't." Fernando felt a mix of relief and frustration. He wanted the doctor to confirm what his heart was already screaming, that Clara was getting better, that there was hope, that the impossible was happening right before everyone's eyes. But science, the science he had always trusted, seemed to be struggling to accept what the data clearly showed. "But she is improving, doctor. The numbers show that, don't they?" Fernando pressed, his voice carrying an urgency that bordered on desperation. Dr. Mendez took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. "The numbers do show a slight improvement, yes. But this could just be her body having a final reaction before a complete collapse. I've seen this happen before. It's as if the body gathers its last strength before giving up." The words hit like a cold shower, but Fernando refused to accept them. Not this time. Not after seeing the pure faith in Anna's eyes. Over the following days, something extraordinary continued to happen. Clara didn't get worse. In cases like hers, each passing day should have brought more deterioration, more complications, more signs that the end was near. But that didn't happen. On the contrary, she continued to show small improvements. On the third day after Anna's visit, Clara opened her eyes completely for the first time in weeks. She didn't say anything, she didn't yet have the strength to speak, but her eyes searched for her father's face, and when they found it, a single tear rolled down the corner. Fernando held her hand and cried with her, tears of a different kind now. They were no longer tears of farewell, but tears of something he still didn't dare name. Anna was there too, sitting on the other side of the bed, and when Clara saw her, a faint but real smile appeared on her pale lips. The medical team was completely perplexed. Dr. Mendez convened a council with other specialists, showing the test results, sharing the history, desperately searching for a scientific explanation for what was happening. They raised hypotheses, tested theories, ordered more exams. Maybe the initial diagnosis was wrong? No, all the tests confirmed the disease. Maybe one of the experimental medications had started working late? Unlikely but possible. Maybe the disease had entered spontaneous remission? Such cases are documented, though extremely rare. Every explanation they offered came with a giant but attached. But that doesn't explain the speed of the improvement. But that doesn't explain the timing. But that doesn't explain why it happened exactly after years of constant decline. Science's answers seemed weak, insufficient, as if they were trying to fit a round phenomenon into a square hole. Fernando listened to everything attentively, but a part of him, a part that was growing stronger every day, began to accept that maybe there was no scientific explanation. Maybe some things simply couldn't be measured in laboratories or explained by charts and statistics. He remembered Anna's words about faith and love, about the power of believing in the impossible. Throughout his life, Fernando had been a man of certainty, of numbers, of concrete facts. But now, watching his daughter slowly return to life against all odds, he began to understand that the universe was far more complex and mysterious than his Excel spreadsheet suggested. There were forces at work that science still couldn't fully understand. And perhaps, just perhaps, those forces were more powerful than any medication or procedure money could buy. Anna continued to visit Clara every day. The guards now knew her by name and let her pass without question, following Fernando's explicit orders. The girl brought stories from the daycare, colorful drawings that she and the other children made, small gifts crafted from paper and string. But more importantly, she brought that energy, that light, that unshakable faith that seemed to fill the room every time she entered. And Clara responded. With each visit from Anna, Clara seemed a little stronger, a little more present, a little more alive. The doctors couldn't explain it, but they couldn't deny it either. One of them, an older physician who had worked at the hospital for decades, pulled Fernando aside one day and said something he would never forget. "Mr. Silva, I've seen a lot in this profession. I've seen miracles that science can't explain. I don't know what that girl brought to your daughter, whether it was the water, whether it was love, whether it was faith. But whatever it is, it's working. And if I were you, I wouldn't question it too much. I would just be grateful." The tension between science and faith became increasingly evident in the hospital corridors. Some doctors refused to admit that anything beyond medical protocol could be helping Clara. They clung to scientific explanations, however unlikely, because admitting otherwise would mean admitting that there are limits to human knowledge. Others, the more experienced or the more humble ones, began to accept that they were witnessing something rare, something special, something that transcended the medical textbooks they had studied for years. Fernando found himself in the middle of that debate, a man who had always trusted only what was tangible now being forced to consider the intangible. And the more he watched Clara improve day after day, the more he leaned toward the side of mystery, the unexplainable, the miraculous. On the 7th day after Anna's first visit, Clara spoke for the first time. Her voice was weak, hoarse, but they were real words coming from her mouth. "Dad." "Anna?" she called to both of them, and when they leaned closer, she whispered something that finally made Fernando understand what was happening. "I dreamed I was at a fountain of clear, shining water. Anna was there calling me. She said I couldn't give up, that there were still many things for us to do together. And I believed her, Dad. I believed her and I came back." Fernando embraced his daughter with all the care in the world, feeling for the first time in weeks that she was no longer just a fragile body saying goodbye to life, but a fighting child coming back home. Science might not have an explanation, the doctors might not understand, but he no longer needed explanations. He had his daughter back, and that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, the hospital witnessed something that went far beyond medical recovery. Clara wasn't just improving physically, she was coming back to life in a way no medicine could provide. And the reason was clear to anyone who stepped into that room: Anna. The poor girl in her worn dress had become a constant presence, arriving every morning even before breakfast was served to patients and only leaving when the hospital lights began to dim at night. She brought with her a contagious energy, a genuine joy that transformed that cold, sterile environment into a place filled with life and laughter. Fernando watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and admiration, realizing that he was learning lessons about what truly matters in life through two children who understood love and friendship more deeply than he had in his 50 years of existence. Anna told Clara stories with a passion that would make any professional storyteller feel envious. They were simple stories about adventures at the community daycare, about the time they found an abandoned kitten and took care of it until they founded a family, about the plans they had to build a treehouse once Clara got better. Clara listened to every word with shining eyes, and sometimes she laughed, a weak but genuine laugh that sounded like heavenly music to Fernando's ears. He realized that those stories weren't just entertainment. They were anchors. They were reasons to live. They were promises of a future Clara had stopped believing she would have. Anna was literally painting a tomorrow so vivid and colorful in her friend's imagination that Clara had no choice but to fight to reach it and live it. The girl also sang. Her voice was off-key and childish, but it carried a sincerity that touched the heart of anyone who listened. They were simple songs she had learned at the daycare, songs about friendship, about not giving up, about believing in dreams. Fernando found himself memorizing those melodies, humming them softly when he was alone in the hallway. One of them said, "A true friend never abandons you, a true friend is always by your side in good times and bad times, a true friend is an endless treasure." Simple words, but ones that carried a deep truth Fernando was only beginning to understand. He had spent his entire life surrounded by partners, business associates, people who respected him for his money and power. But how many of them would be capable of doing what Anna was doing? How many would risk everything, give themselves completely, purely out of love and friendship? Clara began to respond more each day. First came isolated words, then short sentences and finally full conversations. And her favorite topic was always the same, the memories she and Anna shared at the community daycare. "Dad, did you know Anna taught me how to make paper airplanes that fly really far? And that we planted little beans in cups and took care of them until they became plants? And that one time we put on a play for the younger kids about a princess who didn't need to be rescued because she was brave herself." Fernando listened to every story with full attention, amazed by this part of his daughter's life he never knew existed. Each account was a stab of guilt, but also a gift. He was finally getting to know his daughter for real, beyond the surface of school reports and carefully maintained appearances. Anna also brought simple but meaningful gifts. One day it was a drawing made by all the children at the daycare wishing Clara a speedy recovery. Another day it was a letter dictated by Dona Maria, filled with words of encouragement and prayers. There were flowers picked from the community garden, colorful stones Anna thought were pretty, even a small bag of candy she had saved money to buy. Each gift, no matter how simple, was received by Clara as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. Fernando contrasted that with the expensive gifts he had always given his daughter. Imported dolls she barely touched, designer clothes she never asked for, technological toys left forgotten in the corner of the room. He had tried to buy his daughter's love with material things, while Anna had won her heart with presence, attention, and genuine love. The lesson was clear and painful. The doctors and nurses began to officially acknowledge what was already obvious to anyone with eyes to see. Anna was an essential part of Clara's recovery. Dr. Mendez included in the medical notes that the patient responds positively to the presence of her friend, showing improvement in mood, appetite, and willingness to cooperate with treatment. It was the scientific way of admitting that something beyond medicine was working. The nurses started adjusting their schedules so as not to interrupt Anna's visits. One of them even brought a more comfortable stool for the girl to sit on. The entire hospital, in some way, had become an accomplice to that friendship that was literally saving a life. Fernando watched it all and felt his heart, which he thought had been hardened by years of ruthless business, soften and open to emotions he had forgotten existed. There was one particularly striking moment Fernando would carry with him forever. It was a rainy afternoon, and Anna was sitting on the bed beside Clara, the two of them watching raindrops hit the window. Anna held her friend's hand and said something simple yet profound. "Clara, do you know why I come here every day? Because a true friend doesn't give up. When you stopped coming to the daycare, I could have thought you didn't want to be my friend anymore. But I knew something was wrong. And when I found out you were sick, I promised myself I would do everything, absolutely everything to help you. Because that's what friends do. We don't abandon the people we love." Clara began to cry and Anna cried too, and the two of them hugged in that awkward way children hug. Fernando had to leave the room because he couldn't hold back his own tears. That friendship was teaching lessons not only to Clara, but to everyone around her. Fernando learned that presence is worth more than presence. The medical team learned that healing goes beyond medication. Mariana, Clara's mother, who had finally come out of sedation and returned to visiting her daughter, learned that true love knows no social boundaries. And Clara, little Clara who was fighting for her life, learned that she was truly loved, not for her father's money or for the things she had, but simply for who she was. That certainty, that deep knowledge of being unconditionally loved, gave her something no medical treatment ever could. A reason to fight, to endure, to not give up. Anna had done more than bring holy water in a golden bottle. She had brought the most powerful ingredient of all into that hospital room. True love and genuine friendship, the only things that truly have the power to heal a broken soul. 3 weeks after Anna's first visit, something happened that made even the most skeptical doctors stop and re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about medicine. Clara sat up in bed by herself. It wasn't with the help of nurses, it wasn't supported by strategically placed pillows. She simply woke up on a sunny Thursday morning, looked at Anna as she arrived with her usual smile, and decided she wanted to sit up to hug her friend properly. Fernando was in the hallway talking to Dr. Mendez when he heard Anna's joyful scream. He ran into the room and saw his daughter sitting up, her legs hanging off the bed, smiling as if she had just conquered the entire world. Tears came instantly without asking permission, rolling down his face as he approached slowly, almost afraid that it was just a cruel dream he would wake up from at any moment. Dr. Mendez came in right behind him, rushed in by the nurses who had witnessed the moment. He examined Clara immediately, checked her muscle strength, tested her reflexes, asked her to perform simple movements. Each test was passed with an ease that completely defied the prognosis given weeks earlier. I don't have words. The doctor finally admitted, removing his glasses and nervously wiping them. A tic Fernando had learned meant he was deeply unsettled by something he couldn't explain. Patients with the level of muscle deterioration Clara had 3 weeks ago cannot sit up on their own without months of intensive physical therapy. This simply doesn't happen. But it was happening. Right there before everyone's eyes, the impossible was unfolding as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The following days brought even more impossibilities turned into reality. Clara began to stand while holding onto the bed rails. Then, with assistance, she took her first shaky steps around the room. Her appetite, which had completely disappeared during the worst days of the illness, came back strong. She asked for food, complained when the hospital soup had no salt, asked to try the fruit Anna brought from home. Her face, once pale and almost translucent, began to regain color. The deep dark circles that made her look like a broken porcelain doll started to fade. Fernando watched every small change with a mix of joy and disbelief. It was like watching a withered flower come back to life in fast motion. Each day brought an improvement the doctors swore was unlikely, and yet it happened. The medical team met several times to discuss the case. They reviewed every exam, every piece of data, every number collected since Clara had been admitted. They ran new tests to confirm that the initial diagnosis was correct. And it was. Clara really did have that rare and aggressive disease. Or rather, she had had it. Because the new tests showed something that left even the most experienced doctors speechless. The disease was disappearing. Not going into remission, not being controlled by medication. It was simply vanishing as if it had never existed. The markers that indicated the presence of the disease were dropping dramatically. The diseased cells were being replaced by healthy ones. Clara's body was regenerating in a way that medical textbooks said was impossible for the type of condition she had. Dr. Mendez requested a medical board with specialists from other hospitals. They came, examined Clara, studied the charts, debated theories. Some suggested that perhaps the initial diagnosis had been wrong, but the tests were far too clear to support that theory. Others proposed that one of the experimental treatments might have worked with an unusual delay, but none of the medications used had a history of causing this kind of sudden recovery. Some mentioned rare cases of spontaneous remission, but even those documented cases did not show such a rapid and complete recovery. In the end, after hours of debate and analysis, they reached the only honest conclusion they could. They had no explanation. Science, with all its accumulated knowledge and advanced technology, was facing something it could not understand or explain. Fernando listened to all of it with a strange sense of validation. His entire life he had trusted science, numbers, provable facts blindly. And when science told him his daughter would die in 3 days, he accepted it as an absolute sentence. But Anna, a poor girl from a community daycare, did not accept it. She brought faith where there had only been hopelessness, brought love where there had only been fear, brought a small bottle of holy water where there had only been expensive medications that didn't work. And now, weeks later, Clara was not only alive, but recovering in a way that defied all scientific expectations and predictions. Fernando was not foolish enough to completely reject science, but he was no longer arrogant enough to believe that science had all the answers. There were mysteries in the universe, forces at work that telescopes and microscopes could not measure. The day came when Clara walked on her own for the first time. It was a simple moment, but filled with meaning impossible to put into words. She was in the hospital hallway, holding Anna's hand on one side and Fernando's on the other. "I want to try by myself," she said with the determination only children have when they decide to do something. Fernando and Anna let go of her hands, ready to catch her if needed, but she didn't need it. Clara took one step, then another, then another. Her steps were a little unsteady, her legs not fully strong yet, but she was walking. She was truly walking on her own. The nurses in the hallway stopped what they were doing to watch. Some passing visitors stopped to observe that little girl walking as if it were the most important spectacle in the world. And for everyone who knew the story, it was exactly that. It was the impossible happening, life defeating death, a miracle unfolding in real time. When Clara reached the end of the hallway and turned around with a victorious smile on her face, the entire corridor applauded. Nurses, doctors, patients, visitors, everyone clapped for that little girl who had defeated what was supposed to be undefeatable. Fernando knelt down and Clara ran into his arms, and he held her like he had never held her before, feeling the warmth of her body, the strength of life pulsing through her, the tangible miracle in his arms. "I did it, Dad. I did it," she shouted, pure joy in her voice. "Yes, my love, you did," Fernando replied, his voice breaking with emotion. "You are the strongest person I know." And he was speaking the absolute truth. Clara had fought death and won, not with money, not with expensive medications, but with something far more powerful. Love, faith, and the strength that comes from knowing you are truly loved. Clara's recovery didn't change only her. It profoundly changed every person who witnessed that miracle unfolding before their eyes. Fernando Silva was perhaps the most transformed of all. The man who had entered that hospital weeks earlier, desperate and broken, believing money was absolute power, was no longer the same man now walking through the corridors with his daughter. He had learned lessons no business school could ever teach, lessons about what truly matters in life. One morning he woke up and made a decision that surprised even himself. He picked up the phone and called his office, giving clear instructions. He was taking an indefinite leave. His meetings would be rescheduled, his commitments cancelled, his projects put on hold. For the first time in decades, Fernando Silva was choosing his family over his empire. And that choice, which once would have seemed impossible, now felt like the only logical and right thing to do. He began spending hours truly talking with Clara, not just asking about school grades or checking whether she was eating properly. He wanted to know about her dreams, her fears, her joys. He discovered that his daughter loved drawing, especially animals, and that she had notebooks filled with illustrations he had never seen because he had never asked. He discovered that she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian when she grew up, because she wanted to care for animals no one else wanted. He discovered that she felt lonely at the expensive school where he had enrolled her, where other children treated her differently because of her family's money. Each discovery was a stab of guilt, but also an opportunity to start over, to be the father he should have been from the beginning. Fernando realized he had spent years building a financial empire while neglecting the only empire that truly mattered: his family. Mariana, Fernando's wife, also went through a profound transformation. When she finally emerged from her emotional collapse and saw her daughter recovering, something inside her broke and rebuilt at the same time. She had been a woman who lived for appearances, for charity galas where she wore expensive jewelry and smiled for photos, but who deep down felt empty and without purpose. Seeing Anna, a girl who had nothing materially but possessed everything that truly mattered, completely changed her perspective. Mariana began visiting the community daycare where Clara and Anna had met. At first, it was just curiosity, a desire to understand that place her daughter had loved so much she had risked everything to attend. But what she found there transformed her life. She found children who needed attention, affection, someone to believe in them. And for the first time in years, Mariana felt she had a true purpose. Anna herself was transformed by the experience, though in more subtle ways. She had always been a child of faith and love, but now she carried a special confidence, a deep understanding that sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest hands. Dona Maria, the woman who cared for the daycare and who had given Anna the holy water, became a central figure in the Silva family's life. Fernando invited her several times to visit Clara at the hospital, and each visit was marked by deep conversations about faith, hope, and the power of genuine love. Dona Maria never asked for anything in return, never tried to take advantage of the rich family's gratitude. She simply smiled with the wisdom that comes from a lifetime of serving others and said she was only doing what anyone would do, helping a child in need. Her humility and kindness left Fernando both ashamed and inspired. Social barriers that once seemed insurmountable began to crumble in unexpected ways. Fernando invited Ana and her family to dinner at the Silva mansion. It was an initially uncomfortable meeting, with Ana's family clearly intimidated by the excessive luxury and the Silva family trying not to seem condescending. But Clara and Ana broke the ice the way only children can, running through the house laughing, showing toys, telling stories. Soon the adults were talking genuinely, sharing life stories so different yet connected by that invisible thread of love both families had for their daughters. Fernando discovered that Ana's father was a construction worker, an honest man who worked long hours to ensure his family had the basics. He had more in common with that man than with many of his millionaire partners. Both were fathers who loved their daughters and would do anything for them. Clara's story spread through the hospital and then through the city. Journalists wanted to cover the miracle of St. Luke's Hospital, but Fernando refused all interviews. This wasn't about publicity or fame. It was something sacred, private, far too precious to be turned into a sensational headline. But he couldn't stop people from talking, and soon there was a small pilgrimage of desperate parents wanting to know about the holy water, about the ancient spring, about what had really healed Clara. Fernando received them kindly, but he was honest. He had no definitive answers. What he could offer was his story, his transformation, and the lesson he had learned that sometimes healing comes from unexpected places and in ways science cannot measure. Some parents left disappointed, wanting a magic formula. Others understood the deeper message and left changed, even if their children were not miraculously healed. Dr. Mendez was also transformed by the experience. A man of pure science who had spent decades trusting only evidence and data, now wrote in his medical journal about the importance of factors that cannot be measured in laboratories. He didn't abandon science, but he expanded his understanding of it. He began paying more attention to patients' emotional well-being, to the social support they had, to the will to live that made the difference between following treatment protocols and giving up. He shared Clara's case at medical conferences, always careful not to sound mystical or anti-scientific, but emphasizing that effective medicine must consider the whole human being, not just the diseased physical body. His lectures sparked heated debates, but also inspired young doctors to keep their minds open to mysteries we still do not fully understand. Perhaps the most beautiful transformation was the friendship between Clara and Ana. What began as a connection between two lonely girls searching for genuine acceptance became an unbreakable bond forged through the fire of adversity. They were no longer just daycare friends or playmates. They were soul sisters, united by an experience few people ever lived through. Clara would never forget that it was Ana who believed when everyone else was giving up, who brought hope when there was only despair, who loved without conditions when the world seemed cruel and unfair. And Ana would never forget that her simple faith, her childlike courage, and her pure love were instruments of something greater, something that saved a life and transformed many others. Together, without knowing it and without planning it, two little girls proved that true love, genuine faith, and sincere friendship are forces more powerful than any technology, any fortune, any earthly power we can imagine. 2 months after Clara's full recovery, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Fernando finally decided to do something he had been postponing for weeks. He needed to see with his own eyes that old well, the source from which Ana had taken the water that supposedly saved his daughter. He invited Ana, Clara, and Dona Maria to join him on this journey to the back of the hospital, where that nearly forgotten place filled with stories and legends was located. They walked through the busy corridors, went down stairways few employees used, passed through maintenance areas, until they reached an old wooden door that gave access to the abandoned gardens at the rear of the hospital complex. There, hidden among overgrown bushes and time-cracked concrete, was the well. It wasn't grand or impressive at all. It was just an old stone structure, partially covered by a rotting wooden lid with dark, still water at the bottom. Fernando knelt beside the well and looked inside. The water was there, unmoving, reflecting the sky like a cloudy mirror. He expected to feel something special, some mystical energy or supernatural presence. But all he felt was the smell of dampness and old earth. There was nothing magical there, nothing to suggest that the water had healing powers. It was just an old well, probably contaminated, certainly not recommended for human consumption. Dona Maria stepped closer and gently placed her hand on his shoulder, as if she knew exactly what was going through the billionaire's mind at that moment. "You're looking for the miracle in the wrong place," she said in that soft yet firm voice that carried decades of wisdom. "The miracle was never in the water, Mr. Silva. It was never in this old, forgotten well." Fernando raised his eyes to her, confused, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of everything. Dona Maria smiled and looked at Ana and Clara, who were playing nearby, laughing the way only children know how to laugh, completely unaware of the depth of the conversation taking place between the adults. The water was only a symbol, a tool for something much greater, she continued, sitting on a nearby stone and motioning for Fernando to do the same. When I gave that little bottle to Anna, I knew the water from this well had no chemical or magical power. But I also knew that Anna needed something concrete to carry her faith, her hope, her love. Children need symbols, objects they can hold in their hands when the invisible feels too distant. So I gave her the water, blessed it with sincere prayers, and let Anna believe it was special. And do you know what happened? Her belief made it special. Not because of the water but because of what the water represented. Fernando processed those words slowly, each one echoing in his mind like bells ringing at different frequencies. So you're saying it was all psychological? That Clara healed because she believed the water was miraculous. He couldn't hide the hint of disappointment in his voice. Dona Maria shook her head vigorously. No, Mr. Silva, you still don't understand. It wasn't psychological in the simplistic sense you're thinking. It was much deeper than that. What healed Clara wasn't the water, and it wasn't just believing in the water. What healed Clara was the unconditional love of a friend willing to risk everything for her. It was the pure faith of a child who refused to accept defeat. It was the genuine hope Anna brought into that room full of despair. It was the true human connection between two souls who loved each other deeply. The water was only the vehicle, the messenger. But the message was love, and true love has a power that even science cannot fully measure. Those words struck Fernando like rays of light piercing the darkness. He looked at the two girls, now sitting on the grass talking about something that made them laugh until they doubled over. And finally, after weeks of searching for explanations, he understood. The miracle didn't happen when Anna poured water on Clara's face. The miracle had been happening for months, since the day Clara met Anna at the community daycare. It was the miracle of two children from completely different worlds finding in each other what was missing in their lives. Clara had everything materially but was lonely, and she found true friendship in Anna. Anna had very little materially but overflowed with love, and she found in Clara someone who valued her not out of pity, but for who she was. That connection, that mutual and genuine love, created a vital force that gave Clara a reason to fight when her body wanted to give up. Fernando remembered all the moments in the hospital. It wasn't the water that made Clara's vital signs improve for the first time. It was the sound of Anna's voice, the presence of her best friend, the implicit promise that a future full of games and adventures was waiting for her. It wasn't the expensive medications that gave Clara the strength to sit, to stand, to walk. It was the stories Anna told, the promises of things they would do together, the unconditional love radiating from that poor girl every time she entered the room. Science searched for chemical and biological explanations, but the answer existed in a dimension microscopes cannot reach. It was the dimension of the human spirit, of the will to live, of the transformative power of true love. And that dimension, Fernando now understood, was just as real as anything that could be measured in laboratories. So the miracle was love? Fernando asked, wanting to confirm that he had finally understood the lesson the universe had been trying to teach him for so long. Dona Maria smiled with the wisdom of someone who had seen many lives and many stories unfold. The miracle was love, yes. But it was also faith, Anna's genuine faith that refused to accept her friend's death. It was courage, the courage of a small child facing guards and rules to bring hope where there was only despair. It was true friendship, the kind that doesn't calculate costs or measure risks, that simply acts because loving is doing. And it was something even greater, something that has many names in different religions and philosophies, but at its core is the same thing. The force of life wanting to prevail, light refusing to be swallowed by darkness, the power of good working through small hands and pure hearts. Fernando sat there for a long time, simply observing that old well that had nothing special about it except the stories people told about it. And then he understood the final lesson, the most important of all. It didn't matter whether the water had any special property or not. It didn't matter whether there had really been miracles happening in that place for centuries or whether they were just coincidences and hope. What mattered was that Anna believed, and that belief moved her to act. She didn't stay home praying passively or waiting for adults to solve everything. She took that little bottle, faced her fears, bypassed the hospital's security, and brought to Clara the only remedy that truly worked, the absolute certainty that she was loved and that her life was worth fighting for. And that certainty, transmitted through holy water or not, through simple words and gestures of affection, was the spark that reignited the flame of life that was almost going out inside Clara. The miracle was not supernatural. It was profoundly human and for that very reason, infinitely more powerful and real. And so, at that old, forgotten well behind the hospital, Fernando Silva finally found the answer he had been searching for from the very beginning. It wasn't the water that had power. It was love. It was the pure faith of a child who refused to give up on her friend. It was the courage to believe in the impossible when all the rational adults had already thrown in the towel. The miracle had always been in Anna's small hands, in the giant heart of a girl who had nothing materially but overflowed with everything that truly matters. Clara was saved not by expensive doctors or experimental treatments, but by something far older and more powerful. True love, genuine friendship, and the force of life refusing to be extinguished while someone still believed. Fernando looked at his empty hands and realized that his entire life he had been chasing the wrong things. He built an empire of money but almost lost his greatest treasure. He had power over thousands of employees but had no power to save his own daughter. He accumulated wealth that could buy entire countries but discovered he couldn't buy one more day of life. And then, a barefoot girl, wearing a worn dress and carrying a faith as vast as the universe, did what all his millions could not. She brought real hope, real life, a real miracle. And that miracle transformed not only Clara, but everyone who witnessed it. It showed that there are forces in this world that microscopes can't measure, money can't buy, and diplomas can't teach. Today Clara and Anna remain inseparable friends. They no longer hide their friendship. They no longer climb walls. Fernando made sure they can be together whenever they want, without social barriers, without foolish prejudice. More than that, he learned to be present in his daughter's life. He stopped being the absent father who compensated absence with expensive gifts and became the father Clara always needed. Someone who is there, who truly listens, who loves unconditionally. Dona Maria's community daycare now receives generous donations from the Silva family, not as condescending charity, but as recognition that that humble place taught lessons no expensive school ever could. And the little golden bottle? Fernando keeps it on a shelf in his office, not as a magical charm, but as a daily reminder that true power was never where he thought it was. But here's the question I want to leave echoing in your mind. How many times are you also looking for miracles in the wrong places? How often do you rely only on money, science, the tangible, and forget that there are invisible forces far more powerful operating around you? When was the last time you believed in the impossible the way Anna did? When was the last time you loved someone with that kind of purity, without calculating costs, without measuring risks, simply loving because loving is the only remedy that truly heals everything? And most importantly, if you were in Fernando's place with all the money in the world but watching someone you love slip away, what would you do differently? This story isn't just about Clara and Anna. It's about all of us, about the choices we make, about where we place our faith, about what we truly value. I want to know from you, do you believe in miracles? Do you believe that true love has the power to heal? Do you think science explains everything, or are there mysteries it hasn't yet reached? Leave your honest opinion down below in the comments. Tell me if you've ever lived through or know someone who lived through something similar, something that defied all logical explanations. I read all the comments and love knowing what you think. And if this story touched your heart in any way, if it made you reflect on your own priorities in life, if it reminded you that there is something beyond money and power, then share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. It could be that friend who's going through a difficult time, that family member who has lost hope, or simply someone you love and want to remind of how important they are. And look, if you made it this far, if you followed this incredible journey from beginning to end, you are exactly the kind of person I want on this channel. Someone who values deep stories, who isn't afraid to feel, who believes that there are still good and extraordinary things happening in this chaotic world. So subscribe to the channel now, hit that red button and turn on notifications. Because every week I bring real stories like this, stories that will make you laugh, cry, reflect, and above all, believe that miracles still happen, just often disguised in ways we never imagine. Don't miss the next stories. They might change your perspective on life just like this one changed mine. I'll see you in the next video, and until then remember, the greatest miracle you can perform today is to truly love someone without conditions, without limits. That is the power we all have and that many forget to use. A big hug and see you next time.